Hi, this is the Apologist Bookshelf, and I'm Gary Zacharias. I really appreciate you being part of the podcast today. This will be the third time I have gone to the book by David Reed called Answering Jehovah's Witnesses, Subject by Subject. And I was doing things before, like their failed prophecies, I should say, plural. Some information about Russell and Rutherford, some of their early leaders, the fact that they claim that they're God's organization and their governing body. And I thought today I'm going to skip around a little bit. I wanted to start with the intro to the book. I like the intro. So Reed says, if your purpose is to enlighten yourself on the Jehovah's Witnesses' beliefs and how to refute them, maybe you could just go through the whole book cover to cover, or maybe just to the chapters that seem most interesting. So I like that approach. You can dip in and dip out because it's organized alphabetically by titles. So here are some of the topics. I'll just pick part of the alphabet here. Under D, it's death and deity. Under F, flags and other F items. For G, you've got gospel, governing body, grace. What do they say about grace? And something called the great crowd. Under M, they've got marriage, Michael the Archangel, military service, mind control, ministers, and so on. So it's really a nice thing. Oh, good. They've got under the P, they got pyramid. Charles Taze Russell was real big on pyramid power. So that lets you tell a little bit about what the founder of the Jehovah's Witnesses was like. He thought there were all sorts of exotic numbers that would add up to something if you took like the pyramid's height and multiply it by inches, from feet to inches, you get a number, and that number meant something in world history. So it was pretty weird stuff. Anyway, so you could read it cover to cover, they said, or you could turn to the chapters that were interesting to you. Reed says, on the other hand, if you're engaged right now in debate with a JW and you want some instant help, you can find those subjects really fast. You can look up the alphabetical arranged headings like I just did, or there's an index at the back of the book. And his point is that each subject here is developed independently of the others. You don't have to read from beginning to end. They said if your aim is to help a particular Jehovah's Witness realize that he or she is actually in the wrong religion, he says you might have a different approach. He said, if you debate a Jehovah's Witness on random subjects, that seldom accomplishes a complete reversal of their religious thinking. Whether you win that argument or you lose the argument, what are you left with? The witness remains a witness. That's the way it goes. So Reed suggests instead of engaging them in debate on a subject of their own choosing, said maybe you should prepare ahead of time, maybe like the chapters on channel of communication, God's organization, and mind control. Why those three? He says that will help you see how the Watchtower Society uses its supposed authority to uphold all sorts of unproved doctrines, and how it uses techniques that are very close to brainwashing to manipulate the thinkers of its followers. Says then you'll understand why the organizational doctrine, the teaching that they say it's God's organization, needs to be cut down first. I think that's a good point. If you try to tell, he says, a Jehovah's Witness why his beliefs are wrong and yours are right, you're going to get all sorts of resistance. And if you think you're making progress, that Jehovah's Witness may just walk away from you. But what if you ask for help and you rephrase your arguments to present the same evidence, but you do it in the form of questions? He says you would accomplish a lot more. So I think that's a good point. So he said, where would you start? Well, he says, most Christians want to start out proving the Trinity because the Jehovah's Witnesses don't buy into that. Or we as Christians would try to argue for the deity of Christ. But he said those are subjects probably least likely to produce results with a Jehovah's Witness. Why? They have been indoctrinated very heavily by the Watchtower Society on the matter of deity more than any other subject. And they can pull all sorts of Bible verses out of context to defend that. It says, so no matter how well you present your evidence for the Trinity or the deity of Christ, and no matter how convincing your arguments could be, you're going to get rejected because it's coming, why? It's coming from you. It's not coming from God's organization, the Watchtower Society. Even if you have good arguments, the JW sees them as lies that are crafted by Satan because he thinks you represent the devil's organization. So the better your arguments, this is kind of strange, but I can see the logic. The more convincing your arguments are, the more likely that a Jehovah's Witness will see you as a dangerous person to be avoided. Now, that's what you don't really want. So Reed says the solution is not to push harder on the Trinity and the deity of Christ, but to move the obstacle out of the way first. Well, what's the obstacle? The Watchtower organization itself and the control that it exercises over the Jehovah's Witness and his or her mind. You got to deal with the brainwashing before they can reason logically. So, back again, what does he say the best subjects are to cover initially? Ones that will undermine their confidence in the Watchtower organization. How do you do that? Well, you point out the prophetic failures, the doctrinal flip-flops, the dishonest cover-ups. I think that's really good advice. So, as he wraps up the intro here, he says, in a nutshell, the best way you can lead a Jehovah's Witness to Christ, you've got to avoid debating theological issues, at least at first. And you start out with well-planned questions rather than hostile arguments. So the idea is let the Jehovah's Witness think that he's teaching you while you're actually asking questions that show that they have failed prophecies, that they have had all sorts of doctrinal flip-flops, and they've had complete dishonesty. He also has a book that I have not read yet. He says you've got some help if you want to take a look at another book by him called How to Rescue Your Loved One from the Watchtower. So his point is after you knock down this great authority that the organization likes to pretend that it has, you knock that down and you turn off the mind control mechanisms, then you can lead more easily a Jehovah's Witness subject by subject through the chapters in the book. So I think that's really good. And then one final comment says if you're dealing with a Jehovah's Witness, don't pull a book out, right? They will immediately see that as apostate literature is what they're going to call it. So, yeah, I think that makes sense. All right, so let me go through just a couple of places that we haven't talked about before in the book. So I'm going to jump ahead here under letter C, channel of communication. Well, what do they mean by that, channel of communication? The single most important doctrine they have is this. People today can have a relationship with God only, emphasis, only through the Watchtower organization. So they said that's the most important doctrine. All the other teachings depend on this one. And they said at various times they've expressed all sorts of doctrinal flip-flops, but the only doctrine that never changes is the organization claims to speak for God on all matters. All matters. So their beliefs are not really based on logic. It's based on, here we go again, the authority of the Watchtower Society. So if you're trying to prove the deity of Christ or the Holy Spirit as being a real person, a Jehovah's Witness still sees the Watchtower Society as God's channel of communication. So it won't work. It's not going to work the way you want it to. You've got to somehow undermine that claim that this society is God's spokesperson. Then you can undermine all the other doctrines that the society teaches. So the most effective way, he says, is to get the Jehovah's Witness that you're talking to examine the things that supposedly have been communicated by the JW Watchtower Society. Things like the failed prophecies, the doctrinal flip-flops, the dishonest deceptions that characterize things that are coming from man rather than from God. So I think that's a really, really good point that he brings out there. So let's go to the second area that he was talking about in the intro. So now I'm in the alphabet under M for mind control. And he talks about the techniques that have been used by the Watchtower organization to really control these people, somewhat like we've seen Moonies that have been handled that same way. But the Jehovah's Witnesses have shown from their testimony, people who have been part of the Watchtower, how many mind control victims are out there. They actually share a lot of basic elements with other brainwashing programs. And here comes a list of 7. And I think these are really useful. In other words, think of the old Mooney organization. Think about L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology, and a bunch of others that tell you to kind of shape up, and come along with them. Heaven's Gate, Jim Jones, and the People's Temple, and things like that. The mind control is just so strong. And here comes the list. And I think this is worth thinking about when we consider other organizations as well as Jehovah's Witnesses and how strongly they will manipulate people. So number one, repetitive instruction, hammering home over and over with books and videos and magazines and meetings, hammering home the same information. So number one, repetitive instruction. Number two, if a new member comes in, he or she is told to break ties with outside friends and limit fellowship with non-member relatives. So there's a sense of isolation that takes place. Boy, Scientology, they went to the extreme of isolation. I mean, they actually have fences up in some places, and phones are out. They don't want you to contact anybody on the outside. Boy, there's a huge clue that you've got mind control going on. Here's number three, a ban on reading critical works. Yeah, as a Jehovah's Witness, and frankly, part of these other groups as well, if you read something that's critical of the organization, you're in big trouble. You have to accept it. You don't want to hear anything from the outside. Number four, what happens to somebody who walks away from this faith? They are denunciated and they are shunned. They're disfellowshipped, they say. You're not supposed to deal with them. So they're giving up a lot when they walk away because they may lose a family member. They may lose close friends because they're not going to deal with them anymore if they walk away. Number five, you'll often encounter verbal attacks undermining the authority of outside institutions. Maybe it's a religious institution, educational one, medical, governmental. Again, I think of L. Ron Hubbard especially. He was always putting down psychiatrists and people who are trying to help individuals, and he said he could do far more good than they could, and he called them all quacks, and he didn't have much respect for a lot of different organizations. So watch out. A lot of these mind control groups attack and undermine the authority of all sorts of other institutions. Number six, what else will mind control groups have? Cults, a unique vocabulary, and they'll have loaded language that'll reinforce their rules. Oh, yeah, I think, again, Scientology has terms like clear, and you have to understand what that's all about, engrams and things like that. So watch out for their unique vocabulary. When Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses talk about Jesus, or they talk about salvation, or they talk about God, or they talk about heaven, sin, salvation, whatever it is, it's going to be different. We can't just say, okay, good, you believe in Jesus. Or, oh, that's good, you believe in God's grace. We have to say, what do you mean by that? Because it's a different vocabulary. Same words, but very different meanings. And then here's number seven. What else do mind control places deal with? An orchestrated superiority/inferiority guilt complex. Yeah. So he's saying, this is Reed, the author, he says, former members commonly report problems with anxiety, fear, and disorientation when they walk away from it. So can I go through those seven one more time? Because this is good for any kind of group that, let's say you've got a friend who's involved in some kind of organization and you've never heard of them before, or you'd like to know more about it. Ask or talk to the person and see if you're hearing repetitive instruction, new members told to better break the ties with anything outside of their group. 3, see if there's a ban on reading anything that's critical about their organization. 4, what do they do when it comes to ex-members? Do they shun them? 5, look for verbal attacks that undermine any outside institution. 6, the vocabulary. What kind of words are they using and what do they mean? And 7, they're orchestrating a superiority or an inferiority guilt complex among the people. So I think that's really powerful. How about new light? I love that idea, new light. So you ask a Jehovah's Witness, hey, I understand from looking at your past here that your organization changed its teachings on flags and military service. You used to view the Great Pyramid as God's stone witness. At one time, you banned vaccinations and organ transplants. You changed your mind on Christmas. You predicted things in 1914 and 1925 and 1975. They didn't come true. And what are you going to get as a response? Well, you're not going to hear, oh, you're right, I guess I need to give up on the Jehovah's Witness. No. They're likely to say, well, I learned from these past errors. This really is God's organization. It proves that God keeps making our light brighter. God is leading this organization. So that's their shield. They call it new light, right? So they're not guilty at all. The idea is based on Proverbs 4:18 that says, but the path of the righteous ones is like the bright light that is getting lighter and lighter until the day is firmly established. Now, in context, if you really look at that verse in Proverbs, it's not a justification for doctrinal changes. It's a contrast with the path of the wicked. So the wicked are dark. They don't know what they're doing. That's verse 19. So it doesn't justify the way they come out with that idea of new light. But the light getting brighter. So essential to their theory about that is that any light from God is true, whether it's old light or new light. So Watchtower founder Charles Taze Russell, he acknowledged this when he left an Adventist group that he'd been part of and started his own religious magazine. He said the Adventists had always been coming up with new light to explain prophetic failures and other changes. And Russell denounced that. So here's what his magazine said. This is back in 1881. If we were following a man, undoubtedly it would be different with us. Undoubtedly one human idea would contradict another, and that which was light 1 or 2 or 6 years ago would be regarded as darkness now. But with God there's no variableness, neither shadow of turning. And so it is with truth. Any knowledge or light coming from God must be like its author. A new view of truth never can contradict a former truth. New light never extinguishes older light, but adds to it. Now, that was what he said when he got his magazine going, but as the years went by, they did more than the Adventists did that he came out of. They keep proclaiming contradictory new light. So here's some examples. For 50 years, around 50 years, the Jehovah's Witnesses had said the Great Pyramid of Egypt was God's stone witness and prophet. Well, now it's called Satan's Bible. And of course, you can look that up under the letter P in this book. Here's a second example. At one time, they encouraged followers to celebrate Christmas. Not now. Now they're forbidding observance of the holiday. How about this one? Here's the third example. After declaring that Christ returned in 1874 and was present since then, they came up with new calculations. It changed the date to 1914. So in each case, the new light contradicted the old light. Now, that couldn't be from God. That's what even Russell had said. Well, what's going on here? They're saying that we're getting new light. It's brighter and brighter, but these are contradictions. So what's been going on? I think this is a good way of putting it. He says instead of getting brighter, the Watchtower's light has actually been blinking on and off. Yeah, they've been, as they quote from Ephesians 4, Reed says, they've been tossed about as by waves and carried hither and thither by every wind of teaching, by means of the trickery of men, by means of cunning and contriving error. That's exactly right. I think that's a good point. So that gives you an idea. Maybe, I'll stop there. So that gives you an idea of the key things that he says we should be starting with. We want to challenge the organization's authority. We want to challenge those prophecies that didn't turn out right. We want to challenge those doctrinal flip-flops. Get them thinking about that before we get into things like the deity of Christ and the existence of the Trinity. And asking questions. Oh, I think that's so good. Like, hey, could you help me with this? I was reading about your organization. At one time you believed X, but you don't now. Could you explain that to me? I'm really confused how that happened. And so we're asking questions as trying to learn. At the same time, we're hoping that it challenges their beliefs. Well, anyway, that's Answering Jehovah's Witnesses, subject by subject. David A. Reed is the author. I think it's easy to read. I think it's an excellent book. I think we all know some Jehovah's Witnesses, and so we need to be at least ready to interact with them. Even if we don't know this book yet, we could just ask them about their beliefs and why they believe it, and gradually begin to understand what they're talking about and go find some responses for their positions. Well, thanks for being part of the podcast again. Hope you're having a good day. Take care.